Good morning, everybody. I don't have to introduce myself. Sensei did a really nice job at that part, but I do want to set the expectation on how this presentation is going to go. I want to find a middle path between all of us because we've got the littles here today, we've got high school students, and then we have young adults, and then the rest of us who fit in my category. So I'm gonna try and find a balance between all of it, and then invite the adults to stick around afterwards for adult study, where we can take a deeper dive into this. So without further ado, here I go. So we all know the story of Siddhartha, right? He snuck out of the palace on his own, and that's where he experienced suffering of people for the first time. Before that, his life was all candy and roses, right? He had no idea that people are suffering on that particular level. But because of what he experienced, he really connected with the suffering of the people out in the village on the outskirts of the palace. And he felt compelled to explore this realm. And through this journey, he actually laid the foundation for which our practice is based. So he found his path through the suffering that he had experienced. So with that being said, for all of you adults, what do we know happens in life? What are guaranteed things?
Taxes.
Thank you very much. That's right. I was going to say death and taxes. And also suffering, right? Which is also one of our noble truths that we have here. We have all suffered at some point in our lives. And some of us are suffering at this very moment. You don't know what's going on with the person sitting next to you. And suffering can latch onto us when we try to ignore it. Sometimes we say to ourselves, oh, this will pass, it's impermanent, right? Because that's one of our lessons, right? In Buddhism, we practice impermanence a lot. But the problem is when we do something like that without acknowledging the suffering that we're experiencing, then it's creating a path of destruction. And it leaves a lot of victims in the wake. So yeah, we have impermanence and things are impermanent, but when we're suffering, that doesn't help us when we're not stopping at that moment to really think about what it is that we're experiencing. And that's where Buddhism is so exciting, right? Because you may not think about it when you're going through any of the issues that you may be going through. But the practice that we have, which is thousands and thousands of years old, has actually provided us with the tools necessary to deal with suffering. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about today. It was quite an introduction, right? But I wanted to lay the foundation so that you all sort of understood which direction that I was going to take us on today. So, and by the way, I always say we're all living on a roller coaster, right? Life goes up and life goes down, and it kind of spins around. And so we need to be prepared to move forward and deal when we move a different way on that roller coaster. Let's see. So who out there, by the way, I forgot to mention, this is an interactive service today. What's suffering, AKA dukkha? Who knows? Any volunteers? Yes, in the front row. What is suffering? When you're hurt. Very good. Thank you. Anybody else? So suffering is pain, right? Emotional pain or physical pain. What else? Feeling unsettled. Very good. Thank you, Anne. I won't belabor this, all right? So suffering is any time we're feeling this sort of pain. Diego, were you starting to think of something? No, okay. Well, suffering is when we're in pain, when we're unsettled, when we're stressed, when we're frustrated. You know, all of those things are a point of frustration. let me show you on the next slide, just to kind of make it easier and go in depth. What do we see in front of us here? That's right, from inside out. So we can see on the top level, there are emotions, right, related to suffering. We might feel sad. We might feel fear and disgust and anger. And I want to thank, Kenton for pointing joy out as well. He's like, well, why is joy in there? How can you suffer from joy? And the point is if we get too attached to thinking that we always have to be happy constantly, that in a way is a form of suffering. We've heard it before. All of us have watched like soap operas and things like that. Well, I just didn't have that love anymore. I thought I was going to have that love all the time. Well, the fact of the matter is you go in and out of that, so don't connect yourself too much on that aspect of suffering. So are we good on this? We understand suffering? Great. Where would we be without all of our Sangha? Which, by the way, it reminded me the reason why I forgot to say thank you to everybody for giving me an opportunity to deliver this message today, because the beautiful part about Jodo Shinshu, which is different from a lot of other ones, is we are all students of the Dharma together. And so it's not where one is always right or one is always wrong. We are collectively together sharing this message, and I learn just as much from all of you as I hope that you learn from each other. So the next question is, well, why do we care about suffering? So we know what suffering is, right? So why do we care about it? I'm sorry, what was that? We need to try and resolve it. Well, that, and the other thing is if we don't accept or acknowledge what our suffering is, we increase our suffering, our pain, our sadness, our unhappiness, our anger. We could also be dissatisfied with a lot of things in our lives because we haven't talked about it. Teshin, this is where I pull you out, okay? He promised me he would help me out. Was there any time in your life, Teshin, that when you were frustrated or angry or just suffering in general that you took it out on somebody? Do you know what that might have been like?
Maybe not my brother.
All right. Right. But therein lies the thing with suffering, right? If we don't acknowledge the suffering, we cause pain and suffering for other people, right? And that's the bigger issue, is sometimes when we don't take the time to sit with what it is that we're feeling, we're gonna make other people feel bad in that process too. So it's important for us to just recognize that our suffering isn't just an insular thing, that there is an interconnectedness with the way that we feel and how it impacts other people. So when we talked about suffering, we referred to it as an emotional aspect. But suffering also has a physical component to it. And the part that's really fun, or me and my field, it's not really fun, but it's really interesting, is that when you're suffering, if you don't have the skills and knowledge to recognize the emotional aspect of it right away, your body has warning signs to let you know when you're suffering. It's sort of like, hey, hold on, you're not recognizing the fact that you're hurting, so now I'm going to make some sort of physical manifestation happen to you. Sometimes our heart races, right? Or maybe, like me, right now, you can't tell with me standing up here, but, I'm suffering. And I tried really hard to prepare. I mean, not only did I use my deodorant and antiperspirant, I used my husband's today, and I'm still sweating. So that in and of its way is something we need to kind of think about. But there are other things that happen in our life that show us. So mine is sweating. Maybe you have a lack of appetite. Maybe you gain weight. Maybe you lose weight. Maybe you have a racing heartbeat. You get headaches. You get tired. You have an inability to sleep and relax. These are all physical manifestations of your suffering. But the part that I think is really important for you to understand is that we can harness what we already know that's within us to recognize when we're suffering. And the more that we practice this, the earlier and the sooner we will be able to put ourselves on a path of balance that brings that joy back into our lives. So I want to provide you all with a little video clip, because what would OCBC be without video clips? Where's Reverend John? Where is he? There he is. Okay. I know I didn't send it to you, but I feel confident that we're going to be okay with this. Yeah, I see it. So Mr. Buckman, Gil Buckman from the movie Parenthood. How many of us have seen that movie Parenthood? It's really fun, and it's a great example. Well, I'm going to set up the stage here. Gil just quit his job because he's a perfectionist. And he was mad at his boss and a whole nother things. You're going to have to go watch the movie to hear the rest of the story. But and his wife just told him, we're going to have another baby. So now his stress level went up, right? He quit his job. He doesn't have where else to go. Now they're going to have another baby. And in walks Grandma.
So when I was 19, Grandpa took me on a roller coaster.
Oh?
Up, down, up, down. Oh, what a ride.
What a great story.
I always wanted to go again. You know, it was just interesting to me that a ride could make me so frightened, so scared, so sick, so excited and so thrilled all together. Some didn't like it. They went on the merry-go-round. That just goes around. Nothing. I like the roller coaster. You get more out of it.
You can see he was like just not ready for it, right? And I love the way Grandma says, some people take the merry-go-round. But I like the roller coaster. In that clip, we can see that Steve Martin's character is knee-deep in his suffering. And when he hears Grandma, you know, he doesn't really relate to what she's saying at that moment, does he? Because he's not there. And that's okay, and I want to let you all know that that's all right, because life is a journey. And in this character's one, he hasn't made it to his destination yet, so he's got a lot of learning that's happening to him, you know, into his life. But one of the greatest things is he moves forward in this process, and you'll see a follow-up clip before we end it, so don't worry, we'll get to that point. But the most important thing I need for you all to know is that process of letting go and recognizing our suffering has a lot to do with recognizing what causes us to suffer in the first place. And by the way, you might be thinking, Nancy, you're talking about suffering, but it sure sounds like the stress as well, and you would be correct, right? Suffering is stress, and a lot of the skills that we talk about on how to balance and deal with our stress are a lot like the things that I'm going to talk about next. So the important part is that we have to be able to free ourselves from our suffering. Of course, that's easier said than done, right? You can always give your friends advice and say, just let it go, let it go. And you're like, I am deep in this feeling right now. I can't let it go. I'm not ready. And you know what? That's okay too. Remember that part I just said about the journey? We all have to go with the ebb and flow of things that are happening in our lives. And if it takes more time for you to sit with the way that you're feeling, then that's okay. But the most important thing is just to recognize that you are suffering and that there are things that you would be able to do to help prevent yourself from suffering more. And so one of the more important things, by the way, is something we hear all the time here at OCBC, and we see it a lot, you know, in each other, and that is the perfectionism aspect of things that we have. And just recognize that we are in fact perfect in our imperfect selves. And I implore that you take a moment to really sit with that and believe that. And maybe it doesn't apply today, but maybe next month it will. And you'll know what I mean when we kind of move forward on this. So I want to give you some of those tips now that are going to help us deal with the suffering that we go through in our lives. And part of it is just mindful meditation, or just practicing mindfulness, being aware of the circumstances that you find yourself in. If you race through your life and ignore everything and just push it all away, it's going to get worse. Oftentimes, I always tell people, I think many of you know that I was sick and I had a cancer journey, right? When I had the opportunity to sit with other people who were sick with me in the chemo chairs, I think one of the biggest differences is because they said, "You're different, Nancy. We don't understand why you are so different than a lot of the other patients sitting next to you." And one of my bigger things is I think it's because of our Buddhist practice, right? A lot of people say, "You're fighting it, Nancy. You're doing a great job. You're fighting the fight." But what I say, or I counter it with, is I wasn't fighting my cancer journey. I was inviting it into my life. I was inviting it to take me on this journey and find out where it's going to take me ultimately in the end. So what I'm asking you to think about is stop fighting sometimes. Sometimes it's okay to sit with who you are and recognize that you're not okay or that you need help. And remember, all of us are suffering, so you don't have to be in this alone. So with that being said, the first thing you need to do is recognize that you're suffering. If someone comes up to you and honestly says, "Hey, are you doing all right?" and you're like, "Nah, no, I'm having a hard time today." That's okay. That's one of those first steps in sort of moving ahead. And sometimes that makes that other person feel a little awkward, right? So maybe if you know they're not really ready to like listen to everything, just say, "But I'm working on it. I'm sitting with it," right? So that lets the pressure come off of them a little bit, but it still allows you to be honest with who you are. The next thing is to identify what your cause is and why you are suffering. For me, a lot of times it's, "Man, I'm really anxious. What is going on with me?" And sometimes I play back and forth on this. Is this about my ego, or is it am I more concerned about other people? And then I move on to the next step, which is deciding whether or not it's in my control. And if I were to think of a good example on this one, a lot of times we're saddened by seeing war or people who are having difficulty getting food or housing. Some of those things are separate from who we are. And I just want you to take a moment to think about, if you're suffering and allowing yourself to get pulled into there, one of the best things that you can do is figure out a way through loving kindness and compassion that you can help those individuals and maybe alleviate their suffering. Because what the best part is when you help other people, you volunteer or you help to alleviate other people's suffering, in a way that makes you feel good too. I think many of you, because of who we are, have felt that, right? Volunteerism is a great way to alleviate the suffering sometimes that you're feeling. And then when you do have control, this is the greatest thing, because it's not so much the suffering or the stressors that are causing us this pain, it's our perception of it, right? So think about that again. It's our perception, how we're thinking about this type of suffering that's really making us hurt. So when you switch the way that you think about it, like maybe someone hurt your feelings, but maybe they're going through something else. You don't know it, right? But sometimes what happens is when you flip your perception, they said something rude or, mean to me, you might say, well, maybe that person's suffering and they're going through something else. And in that interesting switch or change of narrative, you've offered yourself a little bit of loving kindness that you can give to them as well, empathy and compassion. Which, reminds me, we do have to practice self-compassion a lot. We all know what's happening on the weekend of the 16th, right, of April. What's coming up here? That's right, the Hanamashri Festival, and a lot of us are stressed out during that point, right? I just want to let you know that you need to just practice self-compassion and recognize again that we're all going to make mistakes or get stressed out or something like that. Just recognize that our fellow Sangha members are feeling a little stressed out too, and just give each other a little bit of grace, right? And also give grace to yourself when we're moving through that. And it's great that you can recite the loving kindness meditation. We just did it before we were coming on, and I hadn't even shown you all my PowerPoint yet, and you knew to have that come up. Page 26, don't forget that. But the loving kindness meditation, there are tons of versions of it on the internet. Find one that suits you and feels good. I'm going to go through one with all of you in just a minute so you can see how I sort of paraphrase it for you. But the big part, again, I don't want you to forget, is this part of alleviating your suffering is just remembering how you can let go of your remote control. And part of that is just the conversation on, is that really a big deal to me or not? And if you can't control it, or if it's not that big of a deal, let it go. Okay? It's going to take some time, but you'll learn how to say, that's not a mountain I want to climb right now. Maybe that's not really important in the schema of all these things that are going on in the world. I perhaps might be being small in that aspect. Just move it through and recognize that. That's one of the biggest things I deal with on a daily basis, and I'm not talking about my husband over there. He's right there. So let's just take a moment. This is my shorter version of loving kindness meditation. The reason why I like it is when I'm hurting or suffering, I use maybe just the first 3 lines for myself. Or if it's someone who's causing me a lot of pain and I want to flip it to more kindness and compassion for them, maybe I just say those middle 3 lines. And then I always like to end it with, may all beings be happy. But it's easy to remember for the kids, happy, healthy, and peace. So let's just take a moment. Let's just take a deep breath together. Ready? We'll do the short version of it. And we'll say it together. Ready? May I be happy. May I be healthy. May I find peace. Now, in the middle 3 lines, think of someone who might be causing you to suffer, or someone else that you want to have them feel better down the line, and you don't have to say the name out loud. May Donna be happy. May Donna be healthy. May Donna find peace. I know she's listening in on YouTube. I promised I'd put her name in the presentation. So, and then last one is, ready? May all beings be happy, may all beings be healthy, and may all beings find peace. And I usually end it with a little Namo Amida Butsu on my own. The reason why these are really important is when it covers a couple things. One is it allows you to stop and recognize that you're hurting, right? Or it may also cause you to stop and recognize that maybe somebody else is causing your suffering. And so part of letting go is acknowledging. You know, when we meditate, they say, oh, you're supposed to have a blank mind. Well, sometimes you can use that opportunity to find out why you're feeling a certain way and get curious about it and learn more about it. And then you end it with this when you're angry. So sometimes I'm saying this every minute. And then by acknowledging that pain and suffering, it goes on every 5 minutes. And then 15 minutes, and then an hour, till eventually I'm not thinking about that issue anymore, but I did acknowledge it in my mind. So keep that in practice. So now I'm going to move over into that clip that I promised you all about Mr. Buckman. And as I set the scene up for all of you, I want you to think about what we've talked about. You know, he wasn't ready on his journey in the first part. And now the second part, he recognizes his suffering. And then he sits with it a little bit. And then he actually finds joy in the end. So here we go. So did you see what happened? No, you didn't see it. Okay, you have to go home and watch it again. All right? Or watch it on YouTube when it comes through. But for the adults, did you see that? How many of you felt that way before? Thank you for your honesty. Rumi and Ray over there. Right. So suffering is a choice, right? And it's our perception that causes that suffering. But we can overcome it by recognizing when we're suffering, by sitting with that suffering, or whatever you want to call it, right? Learning to let it go. Because what happens ultimately is it will instill a powerful sense of love and compassion within us, and that ultimately sets us free. So I'm going to end the presentation all together with all of you. Namaste.